us some money!
So real quick, before we get into the review, I know it took a while, I'm sorry, I had shit going on. Let's talk a little bit about episodic and serialized storytelling. Y'all know what this stuff is. Episodic storytelling is the thing where an installment is composed of mostly isolated tales that can easily stand on their own that the average viewer needs little to no prior knowledge about going in, like the average sitcom or the average Saturday morning cartoon. Serialized storytelling is the format where each installment adds to a greater whole and is full of plot threads that are meant to weave together into a satisfying conclusion at the very end that requires long-term commitment to get the best experience, like 24, old school Doctor Who, Legend of Korra, Game of Thrones, and so on. These forms of storytelling have their strengths and weaknesses, and personal preferences can vary. Though thanks to binge culture, serialization is currently rather popular. Though honestly, considering a lot of serialized stories are being released in full season bursts, it might be dishonest to consider it serialized storytelling at all and rather just really long episodic stories that take a year or so for every new installment. Now you might be thinking, Michaela, you magnificent little twat. The thumbnail says this is an Owl House review, but so far you're just waxing poetic about episodic versus serialization. What gives? Well, it comes back to the Owl House episode we're talking about, The Intruder, the first episode that is relevant to what viewers would consider the overall plot, a sentiment that might confuse some of you who recognize that the Owl House is an episodic series. Well, the truth of the matter is that with the rise in popularity that serialization has been having, there are some creators that have been trying to get the best of both worlds, where they structurally have episodic stories, but include ongoing plot threads that would be touched upon and resolved later down the line, not unlike what we see in serialized storytelling. Now, this isn't really a new thing in terms of modern entertainment. It's been around for quite a while. It's just that recently it's been a popular choice of direction for children's entertainment. Case in point, The Intruder gives us a few plot threads that are talked about in future episodes being resolved by the season's end. That being Ida's curse and Luz's first real step into becoming a witch. Now, this approach isn't necessarily a bad idea in and of itself, but in the Owl House's case, it runs the risk of the fandom missing the forest for the trees. The Intruder is a good episode, and the mystery behind Ida's curse is handled very well. However, the existence of this episode and others like it tend to lean viewers into interpreting episodes that aren't like this as meaningless filler. See, this is the kind of problem you run into when you add serialized elements in an episodic series. People are just going to see it as a serialized story and get frustrated at all the supposed filler, completely ignoring the fact that such filler is in fact the heart of the show, and very much worth the viewer's time. Also, because episodic shows are harder to make those frame-by-frame breakdown, what does it mean? Videos on YouTube where everyone tries to predict the big twist if the show even has one. This episode garnered a lot of that too. This isn't helped by the fact that the Owl House includes the talents of Alex Hirsch and bears a few structural similarities to Gravity Falls. So everyone just gets into this series expecting another Gravity Falls. I've gone on record saying how especially not a fan I am of this. Look, I get that you all really liked that show and wanted it to last longer than 2 seasons, but Dana's work deserves to stand on its own merits. So full disclaimer, The Intruder is not when the show gets good. The show was good from the start, and just because some episodes aren't crucial to Ida's curse or the Emperor's Coven does not mean they are lesser in any way. We need to stop assigning quality by way of how many elements of serialization can fit into an episodic series. Anyway, on to the episode itself. Fucking finally. So Boiling Rain designates these 3 into a bottle episode where Luz tries her best to actually learn magic from Ida, while King tries his best to get Luz's attention to teach her about demons, while Ida tries her best to just get a fucking nap. So this all comes to head when Ida is revealed to turn into an owl beast if she doesn't have her elixir, Luz learns her first spell, let us not dilly-dally, we have all seen this episode. Less time summarizing, more time analyzing. Perhaps the best thing about The Intruder is not the reveal of Ida's curse or the mystery behind it, it's that every one of the main trio has some great character work and shining moment. See, usually in this show, these 3 characters tend to get divided into an A and B plot that don't really have an impact on each other until the resolution, if that. Sometimes it's Ida and King doing a thing while Luz is off on her shenanigans. Sometimes it's Luz and King while Ida is dealing with the curse or her sister. This episode, however, they're all together. Now granted, Ida does spend a good portion of this episode as a plot device / source of conflict, and this episode is more character establishing rather than character developing, but we do see some growth between her and Luz as master and apprentice by the end, so I say it still counts. Being the main protagonist, Luz's story gets top billing in terms of importance. The poor girl is 4 episodes in so far and hasn't learned a single spell. At this point, it's gonna feel like she ran away from home for jack shit. On that note, while becoming a witch was her primary reason for staying in the Boiling Isles, the prospect of actually doing magic is so entrancing that she pays little to no attention to King's attempts at teaching her about demons, which would qualify this as hyperfixation. I'm telling you, this girl has ADHD, possibly undiagnosed. Hey, so funny story, I actually wrote this script before there was that whole Q&A thing where Dana Terrace actually confirmed Luz to have ADHD, so yeah. Look at me and how smart I am. Eventually, she manages to get Ida to teach her about magic through a healthy bit of extortion. Damn, she certainly is learning more from Ida, isn't she? Alas, this small victory is swiftly brought to a halt when she discovers that her body cannot naturally produce the bile which is used to perform spells. This more or less leaves her to her own devices for the remainder of the episode. A brief moment of forward thinking paying off in the end where she learns her very first spell on her own. This approach to Luz's witch training is genius in its applicability. At the end of the day, Luz cannot perform magic like any other witch because she lacks what is required for that kind of approach to magic. This isn't helped by the fact that the woman who is responsible for teaching her is generally quite apathetic to the whole thing. I will bet you anything that at least a quarter of the people who watch this show can relate to this. The fact of the matter is that, to this day, standard education is extremely unfriendly to those with learning disabilities or who are simply neurodivergent. The school system is given the admittedly Herculean task of taking a bunch of children from different backgrounds and with different needs and drilling basic information into them to make them functioning adults. Alas, the outdated framework tends to make them fail at this job on all fronts, but it's especially true to those who aren't neurotypical or abled. This reality is made even worse when the school staff is either under-equipped to handle these kind of kids, apathetic to their plights, or both. Then they're just left to their own devices to figure some of this shit out, which is not guaranteed to happen. The fact that Luz physically cannot learn magic the way other witches can makes this situation very applicable to real-world problems. It's bringing her apprenticeship to a complete stop, an apprenticeship that she very much wanted from the beginning. This is something that happens in real life too. Children are actually enthusiastic to learn but are unable to because the framework doesn't meet their needs, and none of the staff either notice or seem to care.
Do you know what it's like to have no one take you seriously?
By sheer happenstance, some guidance from King, and a bit of ingenuity from Luz, she actually does succeed in casting her first spell by way of glyph magic. A Luz spell, imagine that. And the fact that she is so awed by her first spell and then is on cloud 9 immediately after the fact is something I bet speaks to a lot of people as well. It's stuff like this that neurodivergent children or children with learning disabilities need to see. It's not that they are doomed to fail in all the important aspects of life, there is a way to teach them the things that they need to learn. It's just that every party involved needs to know how to approach it. We can't just rely on the children themselves to figure this out. Also, her using glyph magic in the form of circular glyphs that consume raw material to use is FMA as fuck, and I approve. I'm especially picky about anime these days, but lifting from FMA is something I wholeheartedly approve of because damn, that series is still so good. It's got problems, but it's still good. Now, circling back, haha, I do refer to this as applicable rather than 100% intentional, as Ida doesn't explicitly learn the lesson of taking her role as a teacher more seriously in this episode. Rather, she learned that it was perhaps unwise to withhold the truth about her condition from Luz and King, and is simply in awe of the fact that Luz actually learned how to do magic on her own. The idea of her learning that she needs to be a more proactive teacher is more of an afterthought, if anything. Luz learning the light glyph herself more plays into a kid's power fantasy of figuring things out without anyone's help. Besides, it wasn't necessarily Ida's fault for not giving Luz's first spell lesson her absolute best. She was fucking exhausted after exerting herself. Whereas last episode, where Luz's doubts in her teachings was a direct consequence of her being too sure of herself, this time it was just a wrong time and place kind of deal. But on to matters that are absolutely 100% intentional, Ida's curse being treated as a chronic illness that she has to take regular medicine for is very refreshing. Like, this isn't even a metaphor about chronic illness, this is just being the thing. Even the detail about her getting it from someone rather than something, which, considering who it was she got it from, makes it even more cursed. Alas, that mystery is one of the reasons viewers of the show tend to treat it more like Gravity Falls than its own thing, which is annoying. At the very least, it gave way to some of those funny joke theories that it was Hootie who cursed her. Speaking of which, this episode was the first one where Hootie actually got a laugh out of me.
Why do they call you the Owl Lady anyway?
Because I'm so wise.
Cause she coughs up rat bones!
But getting back on topic, the idea that people, especially older people, needing a particular kind of medication is something that is more often than not treated as a joke. The fact that these people need their medicine being the butt of the joke, unfortunately. So to see a children's property that is, at the end of the day, a comedy horror series treat this topic with dignity is something we absolutely need more of. When people talk about family shows imparting important lessons onto children, this is what they should be talking about. It's not about telling stories with a ton of lore that just require fucking homework to keep track of. It's about telling stories regarding things that can affect children's day-to-day lives in a way that they can understand. In terms of the owl beast itself, there's not a whole lot I can say about it. The design is cool, and its implementation in this episode as a survival horror monster in the third act is pretty nifty. Not really much more to it I can say in this episode, I'm afraid. Though I will say it does a fantastic job catering to monster fuckers who also have a thing for MILFs. Like a MILFster fucker. Before we move on, I just want to list some other things about Ida I liked in this episode that I couldn't fit organically into the script, cause I'm just that much of a thirsty bitch. I love how this episode starts off showing just how much of a fucking powerhouse Ida is. We don't see enough fantasy stories that showcase older women as possessing such raw power and knowing how to use it. We get a lot of that in the Owl House and I fucking love it. I like how she has a weakness for shiny stuff too, that's super adorable. And honestly, I'd love that moment near the end where she is just in silent awe of Luz's magic. In my mind's eye, this is the first major milestone in Ida's relationship with Luz. At this point, she has demonstrated a fair degree of responsibility for Luz's safety, even if she didn't put much effort into her position as a mentor. But seeing a human do the impossible and perform magic on their own, it was then that she knew that Luz was something special and their social link went up a grade. Anyways, last but not, well, I suppose you could consider at least, depending on who your favorite character is, we got King's character arc. Picking up from where the last episode left off, King is very enthusiastic about teaching Luz about demons. On top of this just being adorable, it's also rather sad to see Luz almost entirely ignoring him in favor of pushing Ida to teach her magic. How sad is it that he's put all this effort into his demon lessons to the point of preparing visual aids for Luz to follow, only for that girl to go flocking to a weary and apathetic Ida who just pulls a spell lesson out of her ass at Luz's behest. It gets to the point where King actually opts to steal Ida's elixir to give it to Luz in return for her to sit through a full lesson. And it's a shame because in the scant instances where Luz isn't drawn to the idea of witchcraft like a moth to a flame, we see her and King being absolutely adorable as a duo, and King admitted by the tail end of the episode that he's trying to teach Luz about demons so that someone might actually care about him. That's really King's driving motivation for everything he does. He's not really after power or authority, he just wants there to be someone there for him.
He's lonely!
And it's his arc, as well as Luz and Ida's, that ties together into the third act conflict as well as the resolution. The LB scare they have here is equal parts due to Ida not telling King or Luz about her curse, Luz pushing Ida to the point of exhausted collapse to try and learn magic from her, and King swiping Ida's elixir to try to bribe Luz for her time and attention. These three character arcs are interconnected and leaves everyone with something to take away from it. Good stuff. This episode has a lot of good stuff in it, and it's just kind of a shame that it's mostly remembered for the revelation of Ida's curse and the mystery behind it. While that stuff is good too, it's not the heart of the Owl House. The true heart is in the form of this delightfully screwy found family. Anyway, stay tuned for the next episode that is also full of things for fans to salivate over. Literally.